The hum of the server room was a low, constant beast in the midnight silence of the office. Eliza kept typing, her fingers flying across the keyboard, translating the garbled recording of the afternoon's budget meeting into clean, concise minutes. It was mindless work, the kind that paid her rent with just enough left over for instant noodles and anxiety. Brenda and the others in the secretarial pool had left hours ago, their laughter echoing down the hall as they talked about weekend plans and husbands who paid for things. Their parting glances at her were a familiar mix of pity and scorn. The poor girl, they called her when they thought she could not hear. 25, plain, and perpetually working late because overtime was the only luxury she could afford. A soft chime cut through the hum. The executive elevator arriving on their floor. Her fingers stilled. No one ever came up this late. She felt the vibration through the floor, a subtle tremor of wrongness. Muffled voices drifted from the main conference room at the end of the hall, the one with the glass walls that were supposed to signify transparency, but only ever seemed to showcase power. She recognized one voice immediately, Mr. Davies, her department head, his tone high and strained. The other was new, a voice like stones settling at the bottom of a river, deep and calm and utterly cold. Curiosity, a dangerous and foolish impulse, pulled her from her desk. She needed the quarterly expense folder from the filing cabinet just outside the conference room anyway. It was a perfect excuse. She moved on silent feet, her worn flats making no sound on the polished concrete floor. The heavy oak door to the conference room was ajar, a sliver of light cutting across the darkened hallway. She slowed, her breath catching in her throat. Inside, Mr. Davies was sweating under the cold wash of the overhead lights. His tie loosened, his face pale. Across the vast mahogany table sat the source of the cold voice. He was a man carved from shadow and stillness. He wore a dark suit tailored so perfectly it seemed a part of him, an extension of his own skin. His dark hair was cut short, severe. He was not looking at the terrified Mr. Davies. He was looking at a tablet, his finger tracing a line of data. "The discrepancy is not a matter of opinion, Robert," he said. The name was a judgment. "It is a matter of arithmetic." "My arithmetic." Behind him, another man stood with his back to the door, broad and silent as a monument. Eliza's eyes darted back to the man at the table. He said something else too low for her to hear about loyalty, about family. Then he made a small, almost imperceptible gesture with his hand, a flick of his fingers. The man behind Mr. Davies moved. There was a soft, choked sound, a heavy thud. Mr. Davies slumped forward, his head hitting the polished table with a sickening crack. Eliza gasped, a tiny, stupid sound, and stumbled backward. Her heel caught the edge of a metal wastebasket. It toppled over, the clatter echoing like a gunshot in the dead quiet of the office. Everything stopped. The conference room door swung open. The man in the suit stood there, framed in the light. He looked directly at her, his eyes black holes in a starkly handsome face. There was no surprise in them, no alarm, only a flat, chilling assessment. He took a single, deliberate step into the hallway, the light catching the heavy gold signet ring on his little finger. "You work late," he said. His voice was the same calm, cold river she had heard before. It was not a question. It was a fact. And in that moment, Eliza understood that her life, the small, miserable, invisible life she had been living, was over. She did not scream. The sound was trapped in her throat, a knot of pure ice. The man, who she would soon learn was named Marco Vescovi, did not kill her. He did not even raise his voice. He simply watched her, his gaze stripping away every layer of her quiet life until she felt utterly exposed. The other man, the one who had been a silent monument, stepped out and righted the trash can. He did it with an unnerving, everyday sort of tidiness. "What is your name?" Marco asked. "Eliza," she whispered, her voice a thread. "Eliza," he repeated, tasting the sound of it. The way he said it was different. Not like her mother, not like the temp agency, not like the mocking girls in the office. He said it like an ownership claim. You will no longer be working for Robert Davies. You will be working for me. The next morning, her world had been dismantled and reassembled into a shape she did not recognize. Her desk in the bustling secretarial pool was empty. Her few belongings, a chipped mug, a wilting succulent, a photo of her late grandmother, had been packed into a small box. She was escorted by the silent, broad-shouldered man named Luca to the penthouse floor, a place she had only ever heard about in rumors. It was a silent world of gray marble, smoked glass, an air that smelled of money and cedar. Her new office was larger than her entire apartment. A wall of glass looked out over the sprawling city, the lights of which suddenly seemed distant and alien. This was not a promotion. It was a prison, beautifully appointed and utterly inescapable. She understood the terms without them being spoken. She would work, she would be silent, and she would live. The alternative was the fate of Mr. Davies. But it was not that simple. He did not lock her away. Instead, he put her to work. He gave her tasks that felt like tests, transcribing audio files of meetings conducted in hushed, coded language, organizing years of financial records from shell corporations, the numbers a dizzying web of transactions. He was not just keeping her quiet. He was studying her. He would appear in her office without a sound, standing by the door and just watching her work, his expression unreadable. He was assessing her, looking for something. Her competence, which had been a survival tool in her old life, was now her audition. She worked with a frantic, focused energy, her fear channeled into ruthless efficiency. She organized as chaos, created color-coded systems, and memorized details she knew she should not know. She survived. That was the first step. The days bled into weeks. The fear began to dull, replaced by a strange, hyper-aware tension. Marco remained a cold, distant enigma. He spoke to her only to give instructions, his voice always level, always controlled. But she saw things. She saw the way men twice his size deferred to him with a single glance. She saw the quiet, lethal violence that coiled just beneath his stillness. He was a predator and she was a creature caught in his territory. One night, while organizing a backlog of files from a storage unit, she found something she was not supposed to see. Tucked inside a ledger from a decade ago was a worn leather portfolio. It was not business. Inside were photographs, faded and soft at the edges. A younger Marco, a ghost of a smile on his lips, his arms slung around another young man who shared his dark eyes and strong jaw, but whose smile was wide and unguarded. His brother. A name, Leo, was written on the back of one photo in elegant script. Beneath the pictures was a newspaper clipping yellowed with age. Tragic accident claims heir. The headline read. It described a car bombing, a suspected gas leak. But tucked with it were other papers. A coroner's report with certain details redacted. A handwritten note with a single name on it. Falcone. The air in the room grew cold. She felt a presence behind her and knew, without turning, that he was there. She had been caught. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird in a cage. Slowly, she turned. Marco stood in the doorway, his face a mask of stone. But his eyes, for the first time, were not cold. They were filled with something far more terrifying. A deep, ancient grief so profound it seemed to have its own gravity. His gaze dropped to the portfolio in her hands. The silence stretched, thin and brittle. She expected rage, a punishment for her transgression. Instead, he walked forward, his movements unnaturally slow. He gently took the portfolio from her hands, his fingers brushing against hers. The contact was like a spark of electricity, brief and shocking. He closed the portfolio and held it for a long moment. Some debts, he said, his voice rough, can never be fully repaid. He did not punish her. He did not even mention it again. But the wall between them had been breached. She had seen the one thing he could not control, the wound he carried deep inside him. Changed nothing, and yet it changed everything. The threat that had been a shadow now began to take shape. The Falcones, the name from the note, were not just a memory. They were a current, active rival, and they were making a move. They knew Marco had cleaned house, that Davies was gone. And they knew there had been a witness, a loose end. They began looking for a secretary. Marco made a decision. Her tiny, run-down apartment was no longer safe. She was to pack a bag and move into the residential suite in the penthouse, 2 doors down from his own. The prison walls were closing in. Luca drove her, the black sedan a silent phantom in the late-night city traffic. Marco sat in the passenger seat, a tense, coiled spring of energy. Eliza sat in the back, watching the familiar, shabby streets of her neighborhood slide by like a scene from someone else's life. They were 2 blocks from her building when it happened. A dark van, parked innocently, suddenly roared to life, its headlights flashing on, pinning them. Another car screeched around the corner, boxing them in. The night erupted. The sound of gunfire was deafening, a percussive storm of shattering glass and popping metal. Luca swore, wrenching the wheel, the heavy sedan lurching as he rammed the car in front of them. In the back, Eliza was thrown against the door, her mind a blank slate of terror. Then, a blur of motion from the front seat. Marco twisted, his movements impossibly fast. His arm came back, not striking her, but shoving her down, hard, onto the floor of the car. His body followed, a solid, living shield over hers. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice a low growl in her ear, the sound vibrating through her skull. The world became a chaotic symphony of violence heard through the filter of his body. The roar of the engine, the shriek of tires, the rhythmic punch of bullets hitting the armored car. Pressed into the leather floor, her face against the cool material of his suit jacket, all she could register was the solid weight of him, the tension in his muscles, the clean, sharp scent of cedar and something else, something metallic and dangerous like gunpowder. The moment was pure terror. But beneath it, a strange current flowed. The absolute, instinctual nature of his protection was more intimate than any touch she had ever known. They broke through. Luca was a master behind the wheel, the sedan a battering ram. The chase was brutal but short. Soon, they were pulling into the secure underground garage of his building, the silence that followed the chaos ringing in her ears. She was shaking, her body trembling with leftover adrenaline. Luca got out to inspect the damage, his movements crisp and professional. Marco moved off her, retreating back to the front seat. He did not look at her. He stared straight ahead through the spiderwebbed windshield. "Luca will find you a place," he said, his voice flat. "A new name, a new life. Far away from here. You will have enough money to never worry again. You will be free." It was the out she should have craved. Freedom. An escape from this violent, gilded cage. She could disappear, become someone else. Someone who had never seen a man die on a mahogany table. Someone who had never been shielded by the body of a killer. She thought of her old life. The pitying looks, the lonely nights, the constant, grinding struggle. It was a miserable life, but it had been hers. Then she thought of the file, of a smiling young man named Leo, of the bottomless grief in Marco's eyes. She saw the war he was fighting, a war that had started long before she stumbled into it. They were hunting her because of him, but they were also hunting him, and they would not stop. A strange, cold resolve settled in her stomach. She was the poor girl no one wanted, the invisible secretary, but she had seen his one weakness, and in this moment, she realized she had no desire to run. "No," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it did not tremble. He finally turned to look at her, his dark eyes searching her face in the dim garage light. "I saw what they did," she continued, her gaze steady. "I'm not a liability anymore. I can help." He stared at her for a long time, the silence stretching. He was seeing her, really seeing her, for the first time. Not as a witness, not as a problem, but as something else. An asset, a weapon he had not known he possessed. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "Very well," he said, and with those 2 words Eliza's choice was made. She was no longer a prisoner. She was a volunteer. Because she chose to stay, he brought her deeper into the war. Her new home was the penthouse suite, and her new job was to be his strategist. He did not want her muscle. He had men for that. He wanted her mind. That quiet, orderly, ruthlessly analytical mind that had once organized expense reports was now aimed at the Falcone Empire. He gave her ledgers, surveillance reports, mountains of raw data. "Find the rot," he told her, spreading the files across the massive dining table that now served as their war room. "My men see soldiers and guns. You see patterns. Find what they cannot." A strange sense of purpose ignited within her. This was a puzzle, a complex and deadly one, but a puzzle nonetheless. She worked day and night, fueled by coffee and a cold, simmering anger. The pity she used to feel for herself was gone, burned away by the ambush. They had not just tried to kill her. They had tried to erase her. She would not let them. She found it not in the ledgers of illicit activities, but in the dry, boring accounts of their legitimate fronts. A logistics company, payments to a shell corporation for security consulting at a specific warehouse in the meatpacking district. The payments were regular, except for one, a massive wire transfer scheduled for the following evening. The same evening Marco was scheduled for a sit-down with a neutral party, a meeting the Falcones had helped arrange. It was a trap. The sit-down was a diversion. The real ambush would be on the route there at that warehouse. She had to warn him. He was in a meeting across town. She called Luca, his second-in-command, but the call went straight to voicemail. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. There was no time. In a moment of pure, desperate inspiration, she ran to the building's central control panel in his office. Her old life had been one of rules and procedures. She knew how corporate buildings worked. With trembling fingers, she found the master fire control and pulled the alarm for the entire skyscraper. The effect was immediate. Alarms blared, strobing lights flashed, and the building's automated systems began to roar. It was a massive, chaotic disruption. It was a signal he could not possibly ignore. Minutes later, he stormed into the penthouse, his face a thundercloud of fury, Luca right behind him. "What did you do?" he roared, his voice cutting through the din of the alarms. She did not flinch. She shoved the printouts of the financial transfers at him, her finger jabbing at the anomalous payment. "The meeting is a lie," she said, her voice high and clear over the noise. "They're not waiting for you at the restaurant. They're waiting for you at this warehouse." The fury in his eyes vanished, replaced by a sudden, chilling stillness. He looked from the papers to her, and in that moment he understood. She had not just found a discrepancy. She had saved his life. He silenced the alarms with a code and turned to Luca. "Get the men. We are changing our destination." He looked back at Eliza. "You're coming with me." He did not take her to the warehouse itself. He took her to a dark, empty office in a building across the street, the window giving them a perfect, terrible view. He wanted her to understand, to see the world she had chosen. She watched as his cars moved in, not with the chaos of an attack, but with the surgical precision of an execution. It was over in minutes, a brutal, silent slaughter. They brought one man back alive. Russo, one of Marco's own capos, the traitor who had been feeding the Falcones information. They brought him to the penthouse, bleeding on the marble floor. Marco asked him one question. "Why?" Russo spat on the floor. "Because you were always weak. Leo was the strong one. You let him die." Marco's face was carved from ice. He pulled a pistol from his waistband, the movement fluid and economical. He shot Russo once in the head. The sound was flat and ugly in the opulent room. He did not look at the body. He looked at Eliza. "This is my world," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "There is no room for forgiveness here." She should have been horrified. She should have been sick. But all she felt was a cold, hard clarity. She nodded, a single, sharp dip of her chin. She had crossed the line. There was no going back. Later that night, the body was gone and the floor was clean, but the air was thick with the aftermath. He stood by the wall of windows, a silhouette against the city lights. She walked to stand beside him, the silence between them a living thing. "You should have let me disappear," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He turned to face her, his eyes dark and shadowed. "I couldn't," he said. The admission was stark, raw, stripped of all artifice. It was not a confession of love. It was a confession of obsession. A claim. "You see things," he said, his voice dropping lower. "You see the truth in the numbers. You saw me." The admission hung between them, more dangerous than any weapon. The war with the Falcons was not over. They were enraged, their trap foiled, their mole executed. And they knew who was responsible. Not Marco's soldiers, but the ghost who had found their plan. The secretary. They sent their message not to Marco's steel and glass fortress, but to the last remnant of Eliza's old life. They found her old apartment building. They could not get to her, so they targeted the next best thing. Her neighbor, Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman with whom Eliza had sometimes shared a cup of tea. They left a dead canary on the old woman's doormat. A message for the snitch. When Luca told her, something inside Eliza fractured. The fear was gone, replaced by a glacial rage. They had reached into her past and threatened an innocent woman to get to her. She had believed she was safe with Marco, but she saw now that safety was not enough. She did not want protection. She wanted retribution. And she, the invisible girl, knew exactly how to get it. She knew the Falcons' largest legitimate front was a massive shipping and logistics firm. She had seen their name in corporate filings during her old life. "They have a digital footprint," she told Marco, her voice cold and level. "Their entire operation. I can get inside. My men can," he started, but she cut him off. "No. They're looking for soldiers. They're not looking for a temp from an auditing firm. They won't see me coming." It was a suicidal risk. He was dead set against it, but he saw the unshakable resolve in her eyes. This was her fight now. He finally relented, providing her with a flawless fake identity and a team of his best men as invisible shadows. The next day, Eliza, the poor girl no one wanted, walked into the heart of the Falcon operation. She wore a drab blazer, carried a clipboard, and projected an aura of bored, bureaucratic authority. She charmed a floor manager with talk of quarterly audits and compliance forms, her knowledge of corporate jargon a disarming weapon. She was given access to a terminal in a back office. She did not look for anything that would scream illegal. She looked for a single logistical error, an anomaly the system would flag but a human would overlook. She found it. A manifest for a shipment of agricultural equipment to a port controlled by a neutral family on the commission. The weight was wrong, the insurance rider was astronomical, and the customs declaration was clearly forged. It was proof they were moving contraband through a protected territory, a cardinal sin. It was checkmate. She downloaded the file to a microdrive. As she turned to leave, her borrowed time ran out. A man with a broken nose and dead eyes blocked her path. "The audit's been cancelled," he said, his hand reaching for her arm. She did not panic. She dropped her clipboard, the papers scattering, creating a momentary diversion. As he bent down, she ran. She knew the layout of these corporate buildings. She headed for the server room, a place of noise and anonymity. But they cornered her there, the hum of the servers a mocking soundtrack to her capture. Suddenly, the fire alarms shrieked to life. Her signal. In the ensuing chaos, she slipped through the tide of evacuating employees. She made it to the parking garage, the air thick with exhaust fumes. Just as she saw Marco's sedan, a hand grabbed her, spinning her around. Antonio Falcone, the head of the family, a man with cold, reptilian eyes, pressed the barrel of a gun to her temple. Marco's car skidded to a halt. He stepped out, his face a mask of lethal calm. "All this trouble?" Antonio sneered, his grip tightening on Eliza. For a secretary, Eliza did not wait to be rescued. She stomped her stiletto heel down, hard, on Antonio's polished shoe. He roared in pain, his focus shattering for a single vital second. She drove her elbow backward, into his ribs. It was not a powerful blow, but it was enough. The gunshot was a single, clean crack. Antonio Falcone crumpled to the ground. The war was over. The data she secured was sent to the commission. The Falcone family was broken, their territory carved up. The cost was absolute. Eliza could never go back. The quiet, invisible secretary was a ghost, replaced by this new woman, forged in fear and fury. Back in the penthouse, the silence was heavy, charged with the residue of violence. Marco walked to the bar and poured 2 glasses of amber liquid. He handed one to her. Her hand was perfectly steady. Antonio Falcone asked what you were, he said, his voice low. He met her gaze, his eyes burning with an intensity that went far beyond obsession. It was reverence. It was awe. You are my queen. It was not a proposal. It was not a declaration of love. It was a statement of fact, an oath sworn in the only language he truly knew. In his world, it was everything. Eliza took the glass. She looked from his face to the glittering, indifferent city spread out below them. It was a kingdom of blood and secrets she had never asked for. She thought of her old life, the quiet desperation, the constant feeling of being less than. She looked back at him, the most dangerous man in the city, the only one who had ever seen her for who she truly was. She raised the glass to her lips and took a slow sip. The whiskey burned, a familiar, welcome fire. She did not smile. She did not need to. She was home.